Do you believe one small act of kindness can change the course of someone's life? Today, we bring you an inspiring story that will restore your faith in humanity. This tale begins on a quiet road in Oklahoma, where a humble veteran crosses paths with an influential woman in need. What happens next is nothing short of life-changing. Let's dive into the veteran who stopped to help, and how his life was forever changed. The sun was setting over a quiet stretch of highway near Tulsa, Oklahoma. A sleek black SUV sat motionless on the roadside, its hazard lights blinking steadily in the fading light. Beside it stood an elegantly dressed woman, looking both frustrated and out of her element. Clara Prescott, a philanthropist and mother to one of the most renowned tech innovators in the world, gazed helplessly at the flat tire on her vehicle. Of all the places to break down, she muttered, glancing at her phone. The roadside assistance line had promised help, but it was nowhere in sight. In the distance, the low rumble of an old pickup truck echoed through the air. The truck, weathered but sturdy, slowed as it neared the stranded SUV. Its driver, a middle-aged man in a worn denim jacket, stepped out. His name was Daniel Hart, a retired Navy mechanic turned handyman who worked odd jobs to support his family. "Need some help, Mom?" Daniel asked, his voice calm and steady, though his eyes showed traces of a long, tiring day. Clara hesitated. Strangers weren't always to be trusted, but something about his demeanor, the sincerity in his eyes, the kindness in his voice, put her at ease. "I do, actually," she admitted. "I've got a flat tire, and I have no idea how to fix it." Daniel nodded and moved closer, inspecting the tire with practiced precision. "No problem. I've handled worse. Used to fix jets on aircraft carriers. This is nothing." As Daniel worked to replace the tire, Clara struck up a conversation. "You're very skilled," she observed. "Thanks. It's second nature," he said with a small smile. "These days, though, I'm mostly fixing fences and farm equipment. Whatever pays the bills." Curious, Clara pressed further. "Do you live nearby?" "Just a few miles down the road," Daniel replied, tightening the lug nuts. "I live with my wife, Rachel, and our son, Ethan. Times have been tough lately. My wife's been battling a serious illness for years, and Ethan had to drop out of college to help out. He's got a gift for engineering, but dreams don't pay medical bills." Clara was moved by his story. "That's a lot to bear," she said softly. Daniel shrugged, his humility evident. "We do what we have to for family, right?" A few minutes later, Daniel stood up, wiping his hands on a cloth. "There you go, Mom. You're all set to go." Clara reached into her purse. "Let me pay you for your time," she offered, holding out a crisp bill. But Daniel shook his head firmly. "No need, Mom. I didn't do it for money. Just happy to help." Clara paused, struck by his selflessness. She extended her hand, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Daniel. You're a rare kind of person." As Daniel climbed back into his truck and drove off, Clara sat in her car, watching him disappear into the distance. For the first time in years, she felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. This man, his kindness, his story, it wasn't something she could simply forget. With a renewed sense of purpose, Clara picked up her phone. She dialed a familiar number, her voice steady yet urgent. "Elliot, I just met someone you need to know about." Her son, Elliot Prescott, a tech billionaire and visionary entrepreneur, paused on the other end. "What's going on, Mom? I'll explain later," Clara replied. "But you have to trust me. This man's story deserves to be heard." And so began the ripple effect of one small act of kindness, an act that would change not just one life, but an entire family's future. Clara Prescott sat at her kitchen table that evening, sipping a cup of tea as she scrolled through her contacts. Her mind was still racing with thoughts of Daniel Hart, the kind stranger who had come to her rescue. His story of struggle and sacrifice lingered in her thoughts, filling her with a mix of admiration and determination. She dialed her son, Elliot Prescott, who was working late at his company's sprawling campus in Palo Alto. "Mom," Elliot greeted warmly, though his voice carried the weight of a long day. "Everything okay? You don't usually call this late." "I'm fine, but there's something I need to tell you," Clara began, her voice steady but insistent. "Today, on the way back from the charity center, I got a flat tire. A man stopped to help me, a veteran named Daniel Hart. And Elliot, his story." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "What about his story?" Elliot asked, his tone growing serious. Clara took a deep breath. "He's retired Navy, worked as a mechanic on aircraft carriers. Now he's doing odd jobs just to get by. His wife is gravely ill. And his son, his incredibly talented son, had to drop out of college to support the family. Elliot, I can't stop thinking about them. This man is doing everything he can for his family. But they're barely holding on." Elliot was silent for a moment, processing his mother's words. "That's tough," he admitted. "But, Mom, there are so many people out there in situations like his. What makes him different?" Clara's voice softened, but her conviction was clear. "Because he didn't have to help me. He didn't even hesitate. And when I offered him money, he refused. He wasn't just kind, Elliot. He was selfless. People like him, people who put others before themselves, they deserve more than the hand life has dealt them." Elliot leaned back in his chair, staring out the window of his office. "Do you have any details? Where he lives? His contact information?" "Not much," Clara admitted. "He mentioned living a few miles outside Tulsa. But I didn't think to ask for his address. I'm sure your team can find him. Though," Elliot chuckled softly, "you have a lot of faith in my team." "Mom, I have faith in you," Clara replied, her voice warm. "You have the power to change lives. Elliot, this man and his family, they need someone to believe in them." Elliot sighed, already feeling the wheels in his mind turning. "All right," he said finally, "I'll look into it, but don't get your hopes up too high." "Okay, these things take time." Clara smiled, relief washing over her. "Thank you, Elliot. I know you won't regret it." The next morning, Elliot called his assistant into his office. "Maya, I need you to track someone down for me," he said, sliding a piece of paper across his desk. Maya glanced at the note, which read, "Daniel Hart, retired Navy mechanic, lives near Tulsa, Oklahoma." "Who is he?" Maya asked. "Someone my mother met," Elliot explained. "She thinks he's worth helping. And if Mom thinks that, I trust her judgment. Get me everything you can about him, his family, his work history, even his financial situation, and keep it discreet." Maya nodded, already tapping notes into her tablet. "I'll get started right away." Back in Oklahoma, Daniel Hart was unaware of the ripple effect his act of kindness had set in motion. That morning, he loaded tools into his truck, preparing for another day of odd jobs. His wife, Rachel, sat by the window, her pale face illuminated by the soft morning light. "Don't work too hard today," she said, her voice gentle but firm. Daniel smiled at her, his expression a mix of love and concern. "I'll be fine, Rachel, just fixing the Simmons fence. Shouldn't take more than a few hours." Their son, Ethan, entered the room, holding a sketchpad filled with intricate car designs. "Dad, before you go, what do you think of this?" he asked, holding up a detailed drawing of an electric vehicle prototype. Daniel studied the design, his pride evident. "It's brilliant, Ethan. You've got a gift. Someday, you'll build cars like these for real." Ethan smiled faintly, but there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Maybe, but for now, it's just a dream." Daniel placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Dreams are worth holding on to. Don't ever forget that." That same afternoon, Maya returned to Elliot's office, a stack of papers in hand. "I found him," she announced. Elliot looked up from his desk, intrigued. "That was fast. His name is Daniel Hart. Just like your mother said." Maya explained. "Lives in a small house outside Tulsa with his wife and son. Rachel Hart has been battling lupus for years, and the medical bills are staggering. Their son, Ethan, dropped out of college 2 years ago. He's a talented engineer, but the family's financial situation forced him to take up manual labor to help out." Elliot frowned, the weight of their story settling over him. "What about Daniel? He's been taking odd jobs wherever he can, repairing fences, fixing farm equipment, that sort of thing," Maya continued, "but it's barely enough to keep them afloat." Elliot leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "All right," he said finally, "let's do something about it." Maya raised an eyebrow. "What do you have in mind?" Elliot smiled faintly, already formulating a plan. "First, I want to meet them. Arrange a visit, but don't tell them who I am. I want to see this man's character for myself." As the sun set over Tulsa, Daniel returned home, exhausted but satisfied with the day's work. He was greeted by Rachel's warm smile and Ethan's quiet enthusiasm as he showed off another design. Unbeknownst to the Hart family, their lives were about to take a turn they never expected, all because of one small act of kindness. A week later, Daniel Hart was at the local farmers' co-op, fixing the engine on an old tractor for one of his neighbors. The scorching Oklahoma sun beat down as he worked, his hands blackened with grease. Despite the hard labor, Daniel took pride in his work, knowing it helped his community and brought a little extra income to his family. "Hey, Dan," called the owner of the tractor, an older man named Frank. "You've got a visitor." Daniel straightened, wiping his hands on a rag, and turned to see a man in his late 30s approaching. The man was dressed casually but carried an air of quiet authority. His name was Elliot Prescott, though Daniel didn't know it yet. "Are you Daniel Hart?" Elliot asked, offering a polite smile. "That's me," Daniel replied, a hint of curiosity in his voice. "How can I help you?" Elliot extended a hand. "My name's Elliot. I've been hearing about the good work you've been doing around here. Mind if I chat with you for a bit?" Daniel hesitated, glancing at the tractor. "Sure, but I've got to finish this job first." "Take your time," Elliot said, stepping aside to watch. As Daniel worked, the two struck up a conversation. Elliot asked about the repairs, and Daniel explained the process with the practiced ease of someone who had spent a lifetime solving mechanical problems. "You're good at this," Elliot remarked. "Ever think about going back to full-time mechanic work?" Daniel chuckled. "That'd be nice, but life had other plans. My wife's been sick for years, and my son had to leave school to help us get by. For now, I do what I can to make ends meet." Elliot nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like you've been through a lot." Daniel shrugged. "We all have our struggles. I'm just grateful for what I've got. A roof over our heads. A family that sticks together. That's more than some people have." Later that day, Elliot drove to a small diner in town, where Maya was waiting for him with a laptop open. "Well?" she asked as he slid into the booth. "He's the real deal," Elliot said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Humble, hard-working, and completely unaware of how extraordinary he is. His story is exactly what Mom described." Maya nodded. "What's the plan, then?" Elliot leaned back, a determined glint in his eyes. "First, we're going to cover his wife's medical bills. No family should have to choose between their health and their future. Second, we're going to get his son back in school. Someone with that much talent shouldn't have to give up on their dreams. And third," Maya raised an eyebrow. "Third, I want Daniel on my team," Elliot said firmly. "The guy's a natural problem solver, and his dedication is unmatched. If he can fix aircraft carriers and tractors, I'm willing to bet he can handle electric cars." Maya smiled. "You're serious about this?" "I am," Elliot replied. "Kindness deserves to be rewarded. It's not just about helping him, it's about showing people that good deeds don't go unnoticed." Back at home, Daniel was sitting on the porch with Rachel, enjoying the cool evening breeze. Ethan was at the kitchen table, sketching yet another car design. "Long day?" Rachel asked, her voice soft but filled with concern. Daniel nodded, taking a sip of sweet tea. "Always is. But I ran into someone interesting today, a guy named Elliot. Seemed like he wanted to know more about what we do around here." Rachel tilted her head. "What kind of man drives all the way out here just to chat?" Daniel shrugged. "Not sure yet, but he didn't seem like the type to waste time. Something about him felt different." Inside, Ethan called out, "Dad, do you think I'll ever get to work on something like this for real?" Daniel glanced at the drawing, a sleek, futuristic vehicle that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. He walked over, studying the design with admiration. "You've got talent, son," he said, his voice steady. "Don't give up on it. Sometimes, life throws opportunities your way when you least expect them." Ethan smiled faintly, but the doubt in his eyes was hard to miss. "I hope you're right." A few days later, an envelope arrived in the mail, addressed to Daniel. The return address bore a logo he didn't recognize, Prescott Innovations. Rachel opened it cautiously, her hands trembling slightly. Inside was a letter, neatly typed on premium stationery. "Dear Mr. Hart, I hope this letter finds you well. My name is Elliot Prescott, and I had the pleasure of meeting you recently. Your kindness, resilience, and dedication to your family have deeply inspired me. Enclosed, you will find an invitation to visit Prescott Innovations headquarters in California. I would like to discuss opportunities that could benefit you and your family. All travel and accommodations will be arranged at no cost to you. Thank you for your time and for being an example of selflessness and perseverance. I look forward to meeting you again soon. Sincerely, Elliot Prescott. Daniel read the letter twice, his brow furrowing in confusion. Rachel, do you think this is real? Rachel placed a reassuring hand on his arm. Only one way to find out. Ethan, who had been listening from the doorway, looked up with wide eyes. California, Dad, this could be huge. Daniel nodded slowly, a cautious hope stirring in his chest. We'll see, son, we'll see. Little did Daniel know, this invitation was just the beginning of a journey that would change his family's future forever. The following week, Daniel Hart, his wife Rachel, and their son Ethan stood at Tulsa International Airport, clutching their tickets and looking around with a mix of wonder and apprehension. It was the first time any of them had flown, and the trip to California felt surreal. Ethan, unable to contain his excitement, glanced at his father. Dad, do you think this Prescott guy is for real? What if it's some kind of scam? Daniel chuckled softly. I don't think someone goes to all this trouble to play a joke. Let's just see where it leads. Rachel smiled faintly, her pale face showing a touch of color as she leaned on Daniel's arm. Whatever this is, it's more than we've ever had. Let's be grateful for the chance. Several hours later, they landed in San Jose and were met by a driver holding a sign with their name on it. The family exchanged uncertain glances before following him to a sleek black SUV, which whisked him away to a luxurious hotel. As they settled into their suite, Ethan marveled at the space. This place is huge. I didn't even know hotels could be this nice. Rachel sat on the edge of the plush bed, running her fingers over the embroidered comforter. It feels like a dream, she murmured. Daniel, however, couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He stood by the window, looking out over the city lights. We'll find out tomorrow what this is all about, he said quietly. For now, let's just rest. The next morning, a car arrived to take them to Prescott Innovations. The sprawling campus was a marvel of modern architecture, with glass buildings gleaming in the sunlight and landscaped gardens lining the walkways. Ethan's eyes widened as they passed rows of futuristic vehicles and state-of-the-art equipment. This is incredible, he whispered, his voice filled with awe. Inside, they were greeted by Elliot Prescott himself, dressed in a tailored suit but with a friendly demeanor. Elliot extended his hand to Daniel. Mr. Hart, it's great to see you again, Elliot said warmly. He turned to Rachel and Ethan, his smile genuine. And you must be Rachel and Ethan. Welcome to Prescott Innovations. Rachel nodded politely, while Ethan could barely contain his excitement. Thank you for inviting us, Daniel said, his tone cautious. But I have to admit, I'm still not sure why we're here. Elliot gestured for them to follow him. Let's take a walk. I think it'll all make sense soon. As they toured the campus, Elliot explained the work his company was doing, pioneering electric vehicles, renewable energy solutions, and cutting-edge transportation technology. Ethan hung on every word, his mind racing with ideas. Finally, they reached a large conference room where Elliot invited him to sit. Let me cut to the chase, Elliot began, his tone turning serious. Daniel, when I met you, I saw a man who embodies resilience, kindness, and integrity. The way you've dedicated yourself to your family and community, despite the challenges you've faced, is nothing short of extraordinary. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I just do what I can. Nothing special about that. Elliot smiled. That's where you're wrong. People like you are rare. And I believe you deserve more than life has given you. That's why I brought you here. He turned to Rachel. Mrs. Hart, I know you've been battling lupus for years. I've arranged for one of the best medical teams in the country to oversee your treatment. All expenses will be covered by my foundation. Rachel gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "Is this real?" Elliot nodded. "It is. And there's more." He looked at Ethan, whose eyes were wide with anticipation. "Ethan, I've seen your sketches. You're incredibly talented, and it's a shame that financial struggles forced you to leave school. I want to change that. Prescott Innovations will cover your tuition so you can finish your degree in automotive engineering. And when you graduate, there's a place for you here." Ethan stared at him, speechless. Finally, he managed to say, "Thank you. I don't even know what to say." Elliot turned back to Daniel. "And as for you, Daniel, I've heard about your skills and work ethic. I believe you have what it takes to make a difference here. I'd like to offer you a position as a technical supervisor on our electric vehicle project. We'll provide training and support to help you succeed." Daniel blinked, stunned. "Mr. Prescott, I don't think I'm qualified for something like this." Elliot leaned forward, his gaze steady. "You have experience, determination, and a willingness to learn. That's all I need. So, what do you say?" Daniel looked at Rachel, whose tears of joy mirrored the pride in her smile. He turned to Ethan, whose face was lit with hope. Taking a deep breath, Daniel nodded. "All right, I'm in." As they left Prescott Innovations that day, the Harts were overwhelmed with gratitude and disbelief. For the first time in years, they felt a sense of hope, a belief that their struggles were finally behind them. Little did they know, this was just the beginning of their new journey. 6 months later, life for the Hart family looked entirely different. Their modest home in Oklahoma had been replaced by a comfortable house near San Jose, close enough for Daniel to commute to Prescott Innovations. For the first time in years, they felt like they were living rather than just surviving. Daniel adjusted the collar of his crisp new uniform, emblazoned with the Prescott Innovations logo. The feeling of pride was almost overwhelming as he looked at himself in the mirror. Rachel, whose health had vastly improved under expert care, watched him with a proud smile. "You look good," she said, her voice warm and strong, a stark contrast to the frailty of months past. Daniel chuckled nervously. "Feels strange, stepping into a place like that. But I'll give it my best." "You always do," Rachel reassured him. "You've earned this." At work, Daniel was welcomed warmly by his team, who respected his years of hands-on mechanical experience. Though he felt out of his depth at times, the training sessions and supportive environment helped him quickly adapt to the role. His dedication and knack for problem-solving soon caught the attention of senior engineers. One day, Elliot stopped by the workshop, watching Daniel tweak an electric motor. He smiled and said, "I knew you'd be a natural. How's it going?" "Better than I expected," Daniel admitted, wiping his hands on a rag. "It's a lot to learn, but I'm enjoying it." Elliot nodded. "Good, because we're just getting started." Meanwhile, Ethan thrived in college, his tuition fully funded by Prescott Innovations. Immersed in his classes, he excelled in projects that pushed the boundaries of automotive design. His professors recognized his potential, and his sketches, once just dreams on paper, began to take shape in prototype form. At the end of his first semester, Ethan received an email from the Prescott Innovations internship coordinator. "We'd like to invite you to work with our engineering team this summer." Over dinner that night, Ethan shared the news with his parents. "I'll be working on actual projects at Prescott," he exclaimed, his excitement infectious. Daniel reached across the table, patting his son's shoulder. "See, I told you dreams are worth holding on to." Rachel beamed, her eyes brimming with pride. "We always knew you could do it." Rachel, no longer bound by constant health struggles, found herself with newfound energy and time. She began volunteering at local clinics, sharing her story with other families facing difficult medical situations. "I know how it feels to think there's no way out," she told one young mother. "But kindness has a way of finding you when you least expect it." Rachel's efforts didn't go unnoticed. She was soon invited to help organize fundraisers for families in need, her compassionate approach making her a beloved figure in the community. As the months went by, the Harts became a symbol of hope at Prescott Innovations. Daniel regularly spoke at company events, sharing his story and encouraging others to embrace the power of small acts of kindness. At one such event, Daniel stood on stage alongside Elliot. "I never thought changing a tire would lead to all of this," Daniel said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But it's not just about what Elliot and Prescott Innovations have done for my family. It's about what we can all do for each other. Kindness is contagious. It changes lives. And not just the lives of those who receive it, but also those who give it." The room erupted into applause. One sunny afternoon, Daniel, Rachel, and Ethan were invited to Elliot's home for a casual lunch. Clara Prescott, the woman whose flat tire had started it all, greeted them warmly. "It's so good to finally meet the whole family," Clara said, embracing Rachel. Turning to Daniel, she added, "I knew there was something special about you that day. You reminded me that there's still so much good in the world. And you reminded me that kindness can go farther than we imagine." Daniel replied with a smile. Over lunch, they reflected on how far they'd come. Ethan excitedly shared his latest project ideas with Elliot, who listened intently, offering encouragement and advice. As the sun began to set, Clara raised her glass to Daniel and his family, for reminding us all that even the smallest acts of kindness can have the biggest impact. By the following year, Daniel had been promoted to project manager at Prescott Innovations. Ethan, now a full-time engineer, was working on cutting-edge vehicle designs. Rachel continued her volunteer work, becoming a pillar of strength and hope in the community. But their story didn't stop there. Inspired by their own journey, the Harts began giving back in every way they could. Daniel mentored young veterans, helping them transition into civilian careers. Ethan started a scholarship fund for students with financial hardships, and Rachel's fundraisers supported families battling chronic illnesses. The ripple effect of that one act of kindness continued to grow, touching lives in ways they never imagined. On a crisp spring morning, the Hart family stood together outside their home, now surrounded by a vibrant garden Rachel had planted herself. Daniel, wearing his Prescott Innovations badge, adjusted his tires. Ethan loaded his sketches into his car for a meeting at work. "You ready for another big day?" Daniel asked, glancing at his son. "Always," Ethan replied with a grin. Rachel, standing between them, smiled. We've come so far, and it all started with a flat tire. Daniel looked at his family, pride swelling in his chest. Sometimes, it's the smallest things that set the biggest changes in motion. And with that, the Harts stepped forward into the bright and boundless future, forever changed by the power of kindness. Final message to viewers. This story is a reminder that even the simplest acts of kindness can create ripples that change lives. Let Daniel Hart's journey inspire you to lend a helping hand whenever you can. Because sometimes, one small gesture is all it takes to transform not just one life, but an entire family's future. Start today, spread kindness.